Hello everybody. For this episode we're going to focus primarily on reviews of some new Reaper releases, and we'll start off with the single entry right now from the Dark Heaven Legends line, and this is Goldar the Barbarian. It's a single piece model of a big muscle-bound barbarian carrying an axe, and he's not wearing much in the way of armor, but he does have some metal plates on his boots, and he does have a metal shoulder pad. The axe head was bent in the package a little bit, so I had to carefully straighten that out. He needed a decent amount of cleaning. As you can see, there's a visible mold line up on his shoulders, and there was also a piece of metal from the casting process going between his left leg and the blade of the axe. Overall, I spent just a couple of minutes cleaning him up. It wasn't anything too bad. The thing I like about this model a whole lot is that he'll fit easily onto a 1-inch base, and I'll be dropping him into my son's Warriors of Chaos army for Warhammer Fantasy. If you're not a Warhammer player, you could also find a lot of good use for him as a player character in D&D, Pathfinder, or any other kind of fantasy role-playing game. Okay, for the next two models we get into the Chronoscope line of new releases, and the first one is a Modern Witch, and in this blister you actually get two different figures. They're both single cast miniatures. The first is the witch herself, and it's a female model. She's wearing a pointy witch hat. She's got long hair that's flowing from underneath it, sort of like it's caught in the wind. She's carrying a broomstick in one hand and a crystal ball in the other. The broomstick is pretty cool. It's got some extra detailing, which are some big dice that are sort of hanging off of it, almost like big fuzzy dice that you'd see on a rear view mirror. She is a little bit scantily clad. She's got a corset on, and she's showing off some belly and a little bit of cleavage, but nothing that you wouldn't be able to show to your grandma and be worried about. Figure had a mold line that was running across the top of the hat and also under her arms. It did clean up pretty easily, but it was noticeable. The second figure is a small cat familiar, and it's actually standing up on its back feet. It's also wearing a coat, and it's standing on top of a thick book, probably her spell book. All of the details on both figures are really well done, should be easy to pick out when painting. My 7-year-old daughter really likes this figure a lot, so I think I'm going to let her paint it up. The next Chronoscope miniature is a sci-fi model. This is an Ilian Scout, and it's a fairly short guy. He's about the size of a tall goblin, and you can tell right away that it's a sci-fi miniature because his mouth sits right at the top of his chest. Now, I don't know if I'm totally sold on that yet. If you're not and you wanted to, it would be a very easy conversion to get some green stuff and putty over and smooth over that. If you like it the way it is, that's great, more power to you. I just don't know which way I'm going to go with it yet. Other than that, I really like the look of the model. He has a long, slender neck. He's wearing a visored helmet, and right now he's looking through a rangefinder. He's got 3 fingers, actually 2 fingers and a thumb on each hand. In his right hand he's holding a pistol. His armor has padding on the knees and on the shoulders, and he's got some big stompy boots on. He also carries a couple grenades on his belt. I like the model and could see him getting dropped into a D20 future game. I just don't know if I'm sold on the mouth and the chest thing, but it does definitely make him look like some kind of alien. Okay, now we're getting into the Warlord releases for this episode, and the first two are from an army that'll be in the upcoming Savage North expansion for Warlord. The first is Kosumi, a Lupine Alpha Guardian, and it's a female model. She stands about the height of an ogre, and it's a 2-piece model with her hands and the staff or weapon she's carrying as a separate piece, and this glued into place very easily, did not need to be pinned or anything. There was a very faint mold line on the weapon itself, and the rest of the model was basically clean, had 1 or 2 tiny bits of metal from the casting process, but just about nothing there. She comes with a 40mm square base. As you can see, she's not wearing a lot in the way of armor, more of a mage, some kind of spellcaster model. And she has a long, bushy tail and also a very long ponytail that's tied up a little bit that reaches almost down to the ground. And if you're a player or fan of Cadwallon, Ragnarok, or Confrontation, this figure and the next one that we're going to see would make really good additions to those games, but of course you could also use them in a Lupine army for Warlord. The second Lupine model is named Taki, and he's an Arctic Shaman. He comes in 4 pieces, so you'll need to do a little more cleaning and assembly than on the previous one. His right arm is holding a long spear, and it has some nice added details with some feathers and some tassels on it. For the left arm, you get a hand and an arm. These need to be glued together and then put into place up at the shoulder. These two pieces needed the most cleaning out of anything on the model. The hand between the fingers had some extra webbing there, and then on the arm itself. Other cleaning was down on the back of his legs. Needed to clean up just a little bit of a mold line there. Otherwise, there wasn't really a whole lot of cleaning on the model, but under his right foot and leading down to the casting tab itself is an extra piece of metal from the casting process. Now, you can either clip this off or decide to just paint it the same as however you're going to paint the base, but you're going to have to decide to do one or the other with this. Added details include a couple of pouches, a large knife, and what looks like a small totem that he's carrying on his back. Out of the two models, I like this one better. He's got a really good sense of animation, like he's running forward, and a very ferocious look on his face. Next up is a Dark Elf warrior, and I don't have any inside information or anything, but my guess would be that he's probably from a new faction that we might see in the Savage North supplement for Warlord. This is probably my favorite model of this batch, partially because I've got a Dark Elf army for Warhammer Fantasy Battles, but also it is just a very cool looking model. There's a tremendous amount of detail on the model, down to filigree that's been sculpted in on parts of his armor and his shoulder pad. The armor is very ornate looking, but sort of in contrast to that, his cloak looks like it's almost shredded and in tatters and blowing in the wind behind him. You can see his pointy ears coming out from under his long, sort of stringy hair, and he has very sharp facial features. Now, he did need a little more cleaning than most of the other models I looked at this time around. There was metal that went from the casting tab up to his longer sword, and also some little burrs and bits of metal that needed to be cleaned here and there, but it's still my favorite figure out of this whole batch, and he's definitely going into my Warhammer Fantasy Dark Elf army. I could see using him as a player character in D&D, and it's also an immediate temptation for me to want to build a Dark Elf army if that's what's coming out of the Savage North supplement for Warlord. And the last model we'll look at this time around is called Platypod, and he's part of a line of miniatures called the Legion of Justice and Cake. And if that sounds unfamiliar, it's because it's not part of Reaper's normal line of figures. Platypod and his mates that form up the Legion are part of a charitable program that Reaper's working with right now. It's on a limited basis only, but they're working with an organization called Child's Play, which is a game industry charity that helps kids in the hospital. Definitely a worthwhile cause, and all of the profits from the sales of these miniatures will go to Child's Play. So even if you don't have a direct use for the miniature, it's a worthwhile cause and you should check it out. And the very last thing for me to tell you about for this episode is just to give you a heads up about ReaperCon. It's coming up towards the end of May, and it's a gaming convention held at Reaper headquarters in Denton, Texas. You can come down and get a tour of the Reaper facility, see how the miniatures are made. You can learn how to play Reaper games. You can play in tournaments and meet the crew of people that work at Reaper Miniatures. Alright, until next time, thanks for watching.